Welcome into the Abyss, and we are here with Bob Ford, author of Burner and many other works. But tonight we're going to be focusing heavily on Burner as the main part of the interview. Burner is the latest novel by Bob Ford, and we are so happy to have him here as our guest tonight. Hello, Bob.
Hey, thanks guys for having me. This has been a blast so far.
So we are watching Pieces, which he's said he's seen before. We're enjoying that, but we want to spend the next couple minutes chatting with Bob. And want to just give you the chance to just tell us a little bit of background on Burner, where the idea came from. And I know you wrote that into at the end of the book. You have some descriptions of where the idea came from. But why don't you go ahead and let us know what Burner's all about and where the idea came from?
Burner was the core concept of Burner actually came from. I'll show you. When I lived in Philadelphia, I worked at a video store for a while, and I picked up a scrapbook that the former owner left behind. Now, initially, the guy was really into theater and plays and just pop culture type of things, so he would cut out newspaper articles that were really interesting. And toward the end, he quit his job and left this behind. Now, toward the end of his scrapbook, then we started getting the things, or newspaper articles like Stephen King and certain articles like that. So I sort of picked it up because I'm a huge King fan. And I started, actually, here you go. There's one right there. I don't know if you guys can see this.
Okay. Yeah, I see him. Stephen King.
That, an old Stephen King article. So I started, when I lived in Philly, started cutting out just strange, weird newspaper articles that would happen in the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I came across an article one day about a Japanese wife whose husband had a heart attack. And it was only, the article was literally a paragraph and a half. Like it was very, very tight. And in the hospital, the Japanese woman, her husband, on his deathbed, said, "I'm sorry." And she had no idea what the hell he was saying sorry about. But she came to realize he was never going to the job that he told her he had been going to for the last 20 years of their marriage. And that was enough. I never saw a follow-up article. I never saw anything at all. But it stuck in my mind for such a long time. And I usually get my titles first before anything. And one day, just this idea of Burner kicked into my mind. I do a lot of crime research and underbelly research and things like that. And the whole concept of a burner phone sort of collided with some other things that I had been working on. And I had just finished working on a project with John Bowden, and it was that pivotal moment where you look at, as a writer, going, okay, well, what's next? What am I working on next? And I had a couple of ideas I thought had some legs, and the idea came back to me, the thought came back to me about this article that I'd read. And I went out in my driveway. There was a baseball game going on in the park across the street from me. And I just sort of kind of let myself go and started working on some notes. And Burner exploded. I wrote probably 5 or 6 pages of longhand notes. And the next day I started writing. I was doing research at the same time. I was watching a lot of documentaries as I was sort of working into it. And I wrote the first draft in a month, which is really, really, really incredibly unusual for me. I normally never, ever write that fast. But I was obsessed with this story. I mean, it was a really unusual process for me. Most of the time, I felt like I was racing to type the words down to catch up. But it deals with 2 strong female characters they're on opposite sides of life. One is very, very wealthy and has a perfect life, perfect husband. Everything's great. She has a daughter in college. Everything's awesome. The other female character is on the verge of graduating medical school. Her life is just on the verge of kicking off. She knows that her boyfriend is going to propose. Life is just starting out to work out very well. And the wealthy woman's husband has an unfortunate accident, an unexpected accident where he dies. And she finds a hidden burner phone. And what she discovers after that makes these two women's lives collide together. So there's the initial origins, and there's the setup. Anything past that, I feel I would start to spoil certain plot.
Yeah, we don't want to give spoilers here tonight. So
yeah.
So you guys have any specific questions about the book? Not spoiler questions.
I mean, and Tom, having read the book, I know you might want to ask these questions from the fetal position. So
Yeah, I
because
mean,
it's a rough book.
My first question, Bob, is what the hell's wrong with you, man? I mean, no.
Well, I was an only child. I was left to my own devices quite often. That's why. That's what's wrong. Many things. Just ask Lucia. Lucia will tell you what's wrong with me. He's known me for a long time.
Because we talked about this on Into the Abyss before about the difference between horror and thriller, and sometimes, especially how horror does not have to be of a mystical monsters and goblins and ghosts and vampires. But
Sure.
I mean, I tell my kids this all the time: the biggest monsters in the world are us, humans.
Yeah.
And that really, I'm going to say right now, the book really, it was just horrifying. Okay, I'm going to say right now, just horrifying. How people could care so little about each other. That they're not even, I mean, you wouldn't treat a mouse in the street the way you treat some people.
No. And what's, I'll tell you what's more disturbing is the documentaries that I watched, the case studies that I've read about real life incidents. I had to cut out a lot of initial things out of the novel. I probably cut out about 10 to 12,000 words that were really based upon real life counts and case studies, because I felt when I was done, those real life inspirations were too over the top. They were too extreme horror. Even though that's not what I set out to write was extreme horror. It just happened to end up that way. But the things that I cut out were based on real life experiences, and they were so over the top, I felt they ended up being unbelievable in a work of fiction.
And that's something.
That's
something I've heard other authors mention, is that sometimes you run into situations where you're trying to write something realistic, and you realize realistic seems too fictional.
It was some of the worst things. I mean, and it's one of those things. All of us, you guys, we all do research to a degree depending on what we're working on, and sometimes you find out and you end up knowing things like, man, I wish I didn't know that now. Like, you can't take it back. No, some of the case studies, I was just absolutely horrified, and it was just one of those things. Like I say, when I was working on this, when I was writing this, some of the moments, even now, I look at certain scenes and certain sections of Burner, and I'm like, man, I actually wrote that. Like, what the hell? Like, you're not alone. I look at that and go, what the hell is wrong with me? But at the time, it was channeling. Like, it didn't feel like writing. I was channeling something weird. It was a very bizarre scene, but the case studies that I read were just so over the top, unbelievable. Like you said, humans are the worst monster. I just couldn't believe some of the things that I was reading, but there was no way to deny that these things actually happened in real life.
I think that actually brings up an interesting topic, especially for you being someone who doesn't usually write extreme horror. I think a lot of people, especially outside of horror, but even in some pockets of horror, like how can someone write that, and what kind of person writes extreme horror? What are your perspectives having written Burner? And, what is that? Where does that come from, and what's the psychology of someone who writes something like that?
Well, that you know what that is actually an excellent question. I have really strong opinions on this kind of question. Um, when you're talking about that kind of thing, and this question does come up an awful lot. I see it come up in a controversial setting of readers and other people online about the writers. What the hell is wrong with you? How could you possibly? You're this, you're that because you wrote this. No, no. The guy who wrote Lolita, it didn't mean that he was the character. You know, Rudyard Kipling, he wasn't a mongoose, but he wrote about Ricky Tikki Tavi. Like there's so many levels of these things. Stephen King, arguably one of the best-selling authors of all time, let alone horror. He was none of those things that he has written about. He's written about racists. He's written about murderers. He's written about any number of things. That is the work. It's not the author. You know, as far as where that idea came from, I tend to lean much more toward horror and dark, gritty underbelly sort of crime. That's just sort of where I've always been drawn for the type of story that I want to write. But outside of that, if it's a good story, I don't care what genre it is, I'm going to write it. I've written a Western, I've written a rom-com, basically. I've written, it's what they call it in the field, but it's a chick lit book. Let's face it. And you know what? I had an absolute freaking blast writing that book because I enjoyed the story. If you look at guys like Michael Crichton, he's written everything from, the original Westworld, Jurassic Park, to ER, to medical thrillers. He's all across the board. He was on to what story appealed to him. But in none of wasn't his characters, And I think it's a fear of mine because I see it come up a lot for people to say, you cannot write this story if you are X. And I think that's crap. I think if you're a writer and you do your research well, you're telling a story. And if you do your research well, you're going to be able to tell that story from the point of view of those characters. It's always that old thing, write what you know. Well, if I only wrote what I knew, that would be an absolutely boring collection of things that I would work on. I think that you can write beyond what you know, as long as you do your homework and you research a little bit. So, I don't know. That's just my 2 cents.
No, I agree with you, and I know. I think you kind of already covered one of the questions I had, which is a guy writing a story that's about 2 female perspectives because your main characters are both women. Writing 2 women characters going through tough situations. That's it's a challenge. I mean, writing a book like this, like Burner, is challenging regardless of who the point of view is. But writing it from 2 female points of view. What kind of drove you to in the writing of that, and what kind of inspired you in trying to bring out that point of view and making sure that you did justice to those points of view?
Well, I think as a writer, I think we all start to study other people, whether it's in an emergency room or it's in a coffee shop or a bar or a school or a job or wherever. I think we study dialogue. I think we study perspectives. So if you study that kind of thing long enough, you start to pay attention to how those type of personalities are going to handle certain situations. For me, for Burner, I wrote the first, I'd say, first 5 pages. I wrote that about, I'd say, 10 or 12 years ago. I sort of knew the start, and then I knew nothing else after that. So I sort of set it aside and was like, you know what? If it's important, if it's a big enough idea, if it has big enough legs, it'll come back to me, and I'll kind of work on it then. I have a billion files, as I'm sure a ton of writers do, on the same sort of situation.
Yep.
And eventually, it came back, and I get the question a lot, as most writers do. How do you decide on what idea to work on? My response is always the one that screams the loudest. And at this particular day, at this particular time, this is the idea that screamed the loudest. And the two women, the two female characters, they just sort of developed on the fly. I mean, normally I have a little bit more of an outline, very, very loose, because I don't like to write the ending of an outline. I like to kind of do the first third. And after I do the first third as an outline, the rest sort of takes care of itself, and I flow with it and just roll with it. But the first, normally with this, I didn't do any outline at all. The characters sort of developed on the fly, and like I say, it was just such a strange, very strange process. Um, Normally, I don't sort of sink into writing a project until I know how the main character thinks, how they would react if they go into a bank or a grocery store or a bar, or, I kind of need to know that sort of background so I'm really familiar with them. This was an entirely different project for me. It was, like I said, I said earlier, a lot of times it was like I was typing as fast as I could to catch up to what was going on. But I hope, yeah, I mean, the reviews that's still coming in are so positive, and I'm proud of the book. I really am, and I just hope that I've done justice to the two female characters. That was really important to me, to make sure that their character arcs stay true to who they are as a character, to who they are as a person. But I just wanted to make them believable and not fall flat. So
I have to say, I think the scariest thing was you were just shining a light into an aspect of society worldwide that a lot of people don't want to see happen. And it totally reminded me of how one of our coworkers used to work for a politician who helped pass the Human Trafficking Act for the federal government. And I'm just
oh
thinking,
wow.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I should go talk to him to get his information because, like you said, some of the stories or some of the facts you went over, just you couldn't imagine actually happening. I'm thinking, Kevin, you're going to be surprised by this. Remember, it was George Phillips.
Okay.
He did the research on this stuff, and he must have been exposed to some horrendous things.
Hmm.
And I mean, you have to wonder. I mean, especially as a writer, would you say like, have you seen a lot of writers kind of go into that dark underbellyness and come out the other side like you have, I guess?
There's definitely been a few. I know Rath James White. He was working on his novel Succulent Prey.
Oh, okay.
He created an online handle. Nobody knows your nickname or whatever, who you are. He got onto some very underbelly message boards. He was doing some research on cannibalism, and he had the same sort of reaction I did. He became fascinated early, then he became quickly disgusted, and then he couldn't take enough showers to clean off what that feeling was at the end. Um, but it's one of the most frightening things that to discover is that this sort of underbelly, terrible, you know, thing is going on, and it's going on around you, whether people want to believe it's there or not. You know, I mean, where I'm at in York, Pennsylvania, I live in sort of this weird intersection. Philadelphia is to my sort of my northeast. Baltimore is to my south. You know, Lancaster, Pennsylvania is to the east. It's this weird juncture of, if you are put into a van here, you're gone. And unless someone sees it happening within a few hours, you are gone somewhere else, and you, with all likelihood, you could never be seen again. And that is a terrifying thought. And this is not the only juncture in the United States that's like this. 60 Minutes did a report maybe 10 years ago about this region. And this isn't a high crime region. It's just that it is easily accessible and easily escapable.
Yeah, and you have this great line. Actually, it's the very last line you have in the kind of the synopsis or whatever. What you wrote at the end of the book. And the world we live in is full of plain white vans.
Yeah, absolutely. How many of those? And here's the thing: when you finish this novel, I've had reviewers and fans message me and say, "I did not pay attention to this until I finished this book, and I've realized just on my 20-minute tour, it is ridiculous how many white vans I pass on the highway to the way to my job, and no one pays them a second guess."
Yep. Yeah.
You know, no one pays them any attention.
I know people.
I'm so thrilled. Like I say, it was a very tough novel. Yeah.
No, I was gonna
What's that?
let you speak. I'll speak after you speak.
Go ahead, Bob.
Go ahead,
no,
Bob.
I was gonna say, you know, I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud of it, even though it was such a unusual, difficult novel to research. But I'm really proud of it. You know, and it's unusual that it's been out for a little over a year now, and I still have having people, and just in the past week, say, you know, I know it's February, but this is my favorite novel of 2022. And to see that kind of stuff, I mean, it's just like, okay, well, that's cool. You know, it's an odd thing for people to say, I enjoyed reading this novel. And I see that come up again and again, because it is a difficult novel to say, I enjoyed it. You say, you know, it was worth the experience. I know it's a weird thing to say, I enjoyed it, because it is a very, very brutal novel to work on. And yeah, I needed to sort of cleanse my soul a little bit after this one, which is why I went to a supernatural novel.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say. I mean, the question often gets asked of writers are like, "Why would you write something like this?" But authors write this stuff, and people read it. And so I think if we turn that question around, why do people read it? Oftentimes, the response you see is that they actually feel better having taken that time to look at what you don't necessarily want to look at, but you feel better knowing what's out there and understanding it. Because in horror, with any sort of monster story, when you can see the monster, it becomes a little less terrifying, and you can respond a little bit better. I think that's why people tend to look at things like crime dramas, or murder, like real life murder mysteries. People like to watch these things because you feel a little bit more safe having analyzed what's out there, it's not pleasant, but but you're ready for the next instance.
I think
Yeah.
Stephen King calls that naming the monster.
Yeah,
You
naming
give it
the
a
monster.
name,
Yep.
naming them, you give it a name. Yeah.
And so it's something that's somewhat cathartic and also kind of very human to be prepared for what's out there. I think it's odd that the question always gets asked of the author, why do you write this? But no one asks, why do you read this? And I think the answer comes back of let's be prepared. And there's a connection there between those writers and those readers.
Also, too, there's something to be said for just like you said, the catharsis. Like
Yep.
I'll describe some of the plots of some of the things I'm working on to some of my senior students, and I have this one senior student who's like, I'll describe the plot, and then she'll look at me with really big eyes, and be like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yes, I am okay because it's a long paper now. This is what keeps me. This is what keeps me okay. Is writing about all this stuff, all this darkness that I have inside, or the darkness in the world.
Yeah.
I put it on paper, and that's how I stay. Okay?
I'm going to another classroom.
All right. Do we have any parting questions for Bob before we return to pieces?
No, I'm just going to say compliment, Bob. I'm going to make sure my wife reads this. She is into this type of stuff. But no, it was really good. I mean, this is one of the few books where I would read a book and then put it down. This one I just read straight through.
I'll have to say also too, as far as a reader, so let me rephrase that. Obviously, haven't been a book reviewer for many years, and now being an acquisitions editor for Cemetery Dance. I'm still having a hard time saying that, but being an acquisitions editor for Cemetery Dance, obviously my preferences take a backseat to the quality of the work. For example, I've accepted ghost stories so far for Cemetery Dance. I've accepted folk horror. I'm currently reading a book right now that is an homage to 70s exploitation grindhouse movie theaters, and it's really, really well written. So as far as the editor side of me, I don't have a preference. I'm like, it's got to be well written. That's all I care about. And of course, as a reader, I have my preferences, and I would have to say that generally speaking, though I appreciate what extreme horror does, extreme horror is not generally my preference. But Bob, you handled it in such a way that it was horrible and terrifying. I don't know if this makes any sense. It was horrible and terrifying, but you handled it in a strangely beautiful way. If that makes any sense. Like, this is a terrible, horrible story, but it was just handled so well.
Yeah, I agree. Extreme horror is not my preferred genre either, but I will say one thing that bothers me with extreme horror is oftentimes it's kind of let's see how much blood we can spill. Look at all these gore.
Yeah,
look
there's the lowest common denominator in every subject.
It's like look what I can put visually out there. But I think, Bob, what's wonderful about Burner is that you kept the humanity in it.
That's right.
I think that's what's often missing for me personally with extreme horror is the humanity of the situation is not often there. The few times I have actually enjoyed extreme horror is when it actually reminds us these are human beings, and I think you nailed that.
Yeah. Well, guys, I truly appreciate that. Send all therapy bills to Kevin Lucia.
Yeah.
Please tell your wife. Tell your wife to send therapy bills to Lucia. No, it is one of those things that when I was writing Burner, they were intentionally short chapters. Because I felt because of the topic matter was so heavy duty and brutal at times, I did want the reader to be able to have the opportunity to take a breath in between chapters. But at the same time, the short chapters, in the middle of editing, I actually slowed myself down, I think, in order to make sure that I included those aspects of humanity that you were talking about, Brian. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't want it. The last thing I wanted to do was to let it slide over into the gore fest extreme horror for the sake of being a gore fest. Yeah. That's not what I wanted to do with this at all. I did want to hit people right in the no-no spot. I did want to do that. I wanted them to
Show me on the doll where Bob Ford touched you.
You got it. You got it.
And
That's
then hit
right.
you.
Kevin, I got your doll right here. Right here.
That is creepy.
You know what? Here's the thing. John Bowden made this for me.
He made it. That's
Hi,
awesome.
Henry.
That
Henry.
rat
And
bastard
terrifying.
sent me his novel that is coming out this year, later this year.
Hi, Henry.
And I can't say anything more because it's so terrible. It actually it's the worst thing I've ever read in one of John Bowden's novels. It's so utterly disturbing. So I get a cardboard box package in the mail, and I'm like, I never get anything from anyone. You send me your books, Lucia.
Yep.
But I never get anything. So this box shows up, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I open it up, and there it is, staring in the middle of the damn cardboard box under tissue paper.
That's horrifying.
This kitten,
That's awesome.
freaking kitten thing. He custom made it. He searched around for a white stuffed cat thing and got a baby doll head and custom made it just to screw with me.
So
I don't know what I'm going to do to him at some point, but it's going to be bad.
Send a baby doll body with a cat's face.
that is
Yes.
amazing. That is amazing.
And when you read this novel when it comes out, you're going to be, that son of a bitch, Bob Ford has an existing one. It's going to haunt you really badly. I'm just going to say that.
So we want to give a shout out to Bob, but we'll also give a shout out to John Bowden.
Oh, John Bowden is the
John
goat.
Bowden is
He's the goat.
look him up as well. John Bowden's amazing, and that is fantastic. I'm glad you have that on this show.
Oh, well, it's here as motivation because whenever I'm feeling sleepy, all I got to do is turn my head. I'm like, holy shit! No, I need to, like, I'm back on it. I'm good. I'm all good.